assuming we thought that that would be good for the lower income communities to be the ones getting rich off of legal weed. Let's just assume that we thought that was a good thing. I don't think that's a good thing, but let's just assume we said from that perspective that's not even happening. So it's a false promise. They're dangling dollar bills in front of these poor people, literally poor people, and saying that this is going to bring them riches, and it's not.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Kevin Sabet, and he's got a fascinating story, a lot of interesting things to talk about, a lot of current relevant topics. So welcome, Doctor.
Thanks so much for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
So let's start off before we get into the meat of things. Tell me who you are, where you come from, what's your background?
Sure. I'm Kevin Sabet. I'm the president and CEO of two nonprofits. One is called Smart Approaches to Marijuana. The other one is the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions. I used to be a White House drug policy advisor in the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations. And I've been doing drug prevention, drug policy work, basically since I was about 14 years old.
Wow. What did you get
So there
started
you
on
go.
when you were 14? What did you get started on when you were 14?
Well, prevention in my community. I grew up in an upper middle class community of Orange County, California, where people thought that drugs was not an issue that was touching us. It was an issue for, over there, usually meant LA, over there. And for those that are familiar with Southern California. And I actually confronted a kind of libertarian school board that didn't want to do much on the drug issue. And we basically, I tried to convince them that this was an issue that was worth investing in, that if you didn't invest in prevention, you were going to have to sort of clean up the mess. And that was going to be more costly and more intervention than if you started early. And that got me into this field. I never, drugs and alcohol was never something I touched. I never had it in my family. I don't have a story of recovery or anything like that. But I was just very touched by a lot of issues my friends and loved ones were going through, and felt that it was kind of up to me to speak for the people who wouldn't speak up for themselves.
So I do have a history of recovery. I'm
Wonderful.
recovering alcoholic and addict, 8.5 years sober. And
Congratulations. It's wonderful.
thank you. A big part of my story was wrestling with marijuana addiction. And that's a difficult thing, I think, to explain to a lot of people, because even like people who are not hardcore libertarians or far left wing, a lot of people say, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's not addictive. It's not harmful. I think there's people that I know that are like currently marijuana is destroying their lives, and they're confused by it because they just know it's not
Right.
it's not a bad thing, right? How do you
Yeah.
deal with that?
Well, we have so many conflicting messages. Our government's saying it's not a big deal. We have a multi-billion-dollar industry whose business it is to make money from this that say it's not a big deal. When in reality, we know more about marijuana than we ever have, and we know that it's worse than we ever thought, much worse than what it was in the 60s and 70s, because it's gotten a lot more potent. The high levels of THC, we've genetically bred the plant to increase the levels of potency, which is THC. That's what that means. That's the THC is the chemical in marijuana that makes you high. So because of that potency increase, we're seeing outcomes we never saw before with regards to psychosis, violence, schizophrenia, with regards to heart issues, cardiovascular issues, of course, learning issues, memory, recall, intelligence. So really important things, important parts of being human that are being touched by the marijuana issue. And that's why I started SAM, is because we needed to have a smart approach. It doesn't mean we need to lock people up. I'm not saying we should give them a criminal record your whole life if you smoked a joint when you were 18. But the reality is we need to take it a lot more seriously than we do. And right now we're giving it a free pass, which really makes no sense because we've cracked down on tobacco so much. To give marijuana a free pass doesn't make any sense right now.
Yeah, a lot of the kind of one of the things that kind of pulled me into marijuana, convinced me that it wasn't a big deal as well. The government lies about this. That they've created some kind of boogeyman. They put out reefer madness and all this stuff to try to scare you, but it's all a bunch of
Yeah.
lies. Like, how do you combat
Right.
that narrative?
Yeah, I mean, look, there may have been a time where things were overblown. I'm not saying that there wasn't, but the reality today is that we're not living at the time when anyone's talking about reefer madness. No kid is being scared about weed when they're in eighth grade. They don't even do education anymore in most schools. So that's not the current reality. The current reality is we have a multi-billion-dollar industry whose business it is to hook young minds, and that's where their profit model comes from. And so and they don't need everyone to be hooked. They just need, 20% of people. It's just like alcohol industry is the same thing. 10% of Americans drink 85% of the alcohol in this country. So that 10% of Americans is what's key to the alcohol industry. And drugs are the same. Marijuana is the same. Tobacco's the same. And so I'm talking about today's reality. And so people want to talk about reefer madness and what they used to say. That's just not the reality of today.
Mm. So one of the things that I'm running, I work at a addiction rehab, and I
Wonderful.
have a lot of friends who work in addiction rehabs. And one of the things that, when we talk amongst ourselves, we're seeing tons of people, overwhelmingly younger men, who we can't even admit to rehab because we can't get them stabilized from marijuana induced psychosis. What can you tell me about
Mhm.
what's going on that front?
That's a huge issue. We don't really know how to handle it because we haven't taken it seriously. Medical schools haven't taken it seriously. The scientific community knows this is a problem, but the protocols dealing with it have been few and far between. They've been very slow to come. And so we people like you doing God's work are kind of left in the lurch to deal with it the way you sort of what your gut says. We need a complete reckoning with this drug in the addiction treatment and in the medical system in this country. We need to take it a lot more seriously. We need to train people to deal with it, and we need to get evidence based practices in there. Right now, it's extremely difficult to deal with, and a lot of mental health professionals don't even understand the link with marijuana and mental health. So they think it's, oh, you must have a long history of bipolar disorder, and that's why this is happening to you, when the majority of people having the psychosis don't have a long history of bipolar disorder or similar. So, or you must have it in your family, and how did they deal with it? A lot of people don't have it in their family. It's not necessarily about a existing condition in their family. So it's very difficult to deal with. The way to deal with it first is to confront the reality that it's real and to start treating it as such in society, in the healthcare system. And we just don't do that.
Mm. So I wanna talk about the legalization, because I guess on paper there's still, a prohibition with marijuana, but you go to pretty much any I'm in Austin, Texas, pretty
Hmm.
much any gas station you go, and there's a giant wall of just different THC products, and they could say, oh, it's Delta 8 or THCA, or it's, but like from what I'm hearing from people, that I've talked to multiple people who said, I stopped buying the stuff at the gas station because it's too strong. I had to go back to the
Right.
illegal stuff.
Right.
And some of the stuff that you see, I mean, it's little gummies that they have in little, single serving packages with like cartoons on them, almost like they're deliberately marketing to kids or teenagers. Like, what are you seeing with like the legalization or de facto legalization?
Well, it's a huge issue. We just had that fight in Texas, and unfortunately, Governor Abbott listened to his donors and went ahead without a ban of THC. And I commend the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who I've gotten to know throughout this process personally, who's a very good guy and who really has been, sometimes against his better interests, but not against his better judgment, because his judgment was correct that this stuff needs to be banned. And instead, this is now the Wild West in Texas on this. So this is, there was, let's back up a little bit. There was, by accident, these products were legalized with the Farm Bill in 2019 by the Congress, 2018. And so what happened was the hemp industry said, yeah, this isn't going to be, this is just going to be for farming. It's not going to be for intoxication. When the reality was, it was all about the intoxication. And so what happened was these, entrepreneurs essentially and chemists came up with a way to grow hemp, which is a cousin of marijuana, and extract these synthetics from. Now, by the way, they're also growing marijuana. People aren't telling the difference. So this idea that we know exactly that they're growing hemp is wrong. So they're probably 50% marijuana anyway. But they're deriving non-THC. THC, Delta 9 THC is the naturally occurring THC. So they're doing things like Delta 10, Delta 8, like one molecule off, basically. and they're extremely dangerous. They're causing psychoses. These are very dangerous, totally untested compounds, and they were basically accidentally legalized on a federal level. So states don't know how to catch up with this. States are very slow, but entrepreneurs and those who want to profit off of addiction and profit off of misery are very fast to work. They've always been very fast to work. So they came with all these products that are now at these gas stations and convenience stores. And we tried to close that loophole in Texas, and it was vetoed, of all things, by the current governor. Huge mistake. It's making Texas a drug haven in many ways, and I think is a real problem.
Is Texas worse in terms of being a drug haven than other states?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
Right now, it's worse than a lot of other states, and it's basically what it's doing there's huge public health impacts resulting from this oversight, and it's a real issue because it's still the Wild West. There was nothing, there was no compromise, there was nothing done, and I think that's a real problem. And so Texas is a lot worse than a lot of its neighboring states. A lot of other states have worked to prohibit it. Now there are also a lot of states that have not done that, and they're doing what Texas is doing, and I think that's wrong. But Texas, in many ways, is really off here.
So this is, I know we, initially agreed to talk about marijuana, but I'm wondering, when I look at the legalized stuff, other than like alcohol and tobacco, the two others that I see pop up pretty frequently with guys who get admitted to treatment are kava and kratom.
Hmm.
And the kratom, it looks like whatever extract they've got is just off the charts in terms of potency. Are you seeing anything with that?
Yeah, no, the kava is a brand new issue that I think is, something that we're still looking at, but it doesn't look good. Kratom is a very important issue, and there's a whole lobby that is trying to, which is, by the way, very well organized, that is essentially trying to keep kratom, together and trying to keep kratom legalized. Kratom sort of was never scheduled by the federal government. In fact, it was supposed to be scheduled in the last government, in the Trump administration, and then that never happened. And so the issue is, you have all these kratom companies now who are really working very hard to, keep their business, and they are essentially selling what we'd call gas station heroin, and they're marketing it as a way to get off of opiates. And we've seen multiple deaths. We've seen a lot of injury resulting from kratom. And so kratom, there's sort of these two, and I won't get into the sort of chemistry and the chemical details, but there's these two elements of it. And one of the elements is being blamed for all the problems by the kratom industry, and the other element they want to keep. And one of the 7-OH is that the first element. And 7-OH, it's now on its way to being illegal, but they were able to keep the other element. And so the other element of it is also deadly, but they're somehow convincing HHS and FDA that that's okay. And there's a huge association. There's a whole American Kratom Association. They've hired multiple people, some friends of mine who used to work in drug policy in the federal government, they've hired to say, this is something that needs to be regulated. We don't want kids to get it. We want to do it the right way. But it's essentially, they use that word regulation, but it means legalization. And they want to legalize it to profit off of it. And it's a growing industry. So the kava industry is not as organized, although they're out there. Kratom is something I really do worry about.
Yeah, the kratom. I mean, the 7-OH stuff is what I've been hearing a lot about, and it sound. I mean, one of I read a study not that long ago showing that
Mhm.
7-OH was stronger than morphine and heroin. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just mind blowing. You can just get that
I
legally at the
know.
gas station, and
I
the
know.
guys that I'm talking to coming off of that stuff say that the withdrawal, the kick, is worse than heroin. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just wild. And you're saying the
Yeah.
other side of the kratom is just as bad?
Yeah, no, it's just as bad. It can be really bad, and it obviously depends on all this stuff depends on the person. But there's no good argument to make it more widely available than it already is. And they're trying to say, oh, but it can help you get off opioids and whatnot. And we're not seeing that at all. And, we actually were in touch with mothers who, have had deaths as a result of this and have had problems. And, we're just not hearing about it from a lot of, we're not hearing the pushback as much because you have this very intimidating industry that's out there.
Hmm. I mean, it seems like there's people like yourself who are doing a lot of public policy work on this, and people like me who are seeing the back end when the floor falls out. People come
Exactly.
to people like me, but I think the general public has no idea like what you can get legally at a gas station and how crazy harmful these things are, between the ridiculously potent THC and the different types of kratom. It just seems completely removed from the public consciousness.
Yeah, it is. It really is. There's so much misinformation. This industry's so big, and the drug it's the drug industry. It's the addiction for profit industry, and so yeah, I'm extremely worried about it. I think it's a big problem.
Mm. Tell me about kind of on the political like lobbying end. I think you
Yeah,
mentioned the big kratom, big THC. Like
yeah.
what are we up against here?
Well, it's a big issue because again you have this sort of again addiction for profit industry. They're really taking their playbook from the industry.
Oh,
They're
I
taking the
lost. I
playbook from the
lost.
tobacco industry. They're from the alcohol industry. And the reality is, that means they are profiting off of people with, who are using drugs heavily. They're not profiting off of occasional users. That's the thing. Like some people say, well, you're right and all this kind of thing. They're not profiting off of those people that, who sort of occasionally use and don't have a problem. They're profiting off of the misery, and they're profiting off of the small number of people who use a lot of it. And whether it's kratom, whether it's THC, the THC industry is literally folks from the tobacco industry that are now getting into it. It's folks from the alcohol industry that are now getting into it. And so, to me, that is what's so crazy is that we haven't learned our lesson from big tobacco, for example. I thought we did learn our lesson, but we haven't, and we're just repeating those same mistakes.
Yeah, it was, for a number of years, it was big tobacco saying, 4 out of 5 doctors recommend you smoke our cigarettes. There's nothing harmful about it. And now they're doing the same thing with marijuana.
Yeah, they are. They're doing, and it's basically they use a lot of the same tactics. So it's about first of all questioning the science. So you hear a lot about, well, marijuana is illegal. We don't know anything about it. It's Schedule 1, so we can't research it. That's false. It is Schedule 1, but you can definitely research it. Heroin is Schedule 1, and we know a lot about it. It doesn't just because it's Schedule 1 doesn't mean we don't know anything about it. We have tens of thousands of peer-reviewed scientific articles in major journals that talk about the harm. So that's a huge issue. We already know that, but they're trying to question it. They're saying, "Well, we're not sure. The jury's out." The jury's not out. Like the jury, when it comes to multiple issues with marijuana, the jury is not out at all. Mental health, physical health, on and on. Number two, they use celebrity endorsements. So it's no surprise. It's no coincidence that some of the top social media influencers are pushing marijuana. They're being paid to do so by this industry. They're trying to get young people recruited. That's not. They do the giveaways and the discounts, just like tobacco did. They hire the lobbyists. We have a hard time even when we get funding. And one of the nonprofits, SAM, learnaboutsam.org, we're a small nonprofit. We don't get a lot of funding. We get individuals who give us money. Who a lot of them, they've lost kids to marijuana, et cetera. So their heart is in it. We don't get funding from big industries or anything. But the issue is when we do have the money to, let's say, hire a lobbyist on a particular issue, like the Delta 8 issue or another issue, it's even hard to find lobbyists because the industry's hired all of them on K Street. Even though they don't use them, they hire them so they can't be hired by someone else. They can't have that conflict of interest. These are tactics that big tobacco did and utilized for decades. They are trying to say this is about adult freedom. The tobacco industry did that for decades. They're trying to say this is about jobs, job creation, productivity. The tobacco industry did that for decades. So it's a really, really, really big issue that we have.
This seems at odds with kind of how like I hear a lot of them paint it as though they're just kind of this like the little guy here who's kind of being picked on by these big people who want to make their medicine illegal is kind of how they're framing it. And you're telling a very different story.
Oh yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's basically the issue is they are framing it as it depends on the audience. So they've been very good at recruiting Republicans and conservatives lately, very good, because they say it's about personal choice, it's about business, and it's about freedom. So they've recruited a lot of the MAGA folks. They actually pay a bunch of influencers on social media. So they do all of that. They've also been able to appeal to liberals when they need to on social justice and say this is a social justice issue. When in reality, it's anything but, because, they said, well, we're going to give licenses for legal weed, for example, to those in poorer communities. We're going to make sure that those that are, affected by the war on drugs, those people are going to get the licenses first. And the reality is those people who don't have the connections, don't have the money, they're not becoming millionaires from the weed industry. They're just not. It's Wall Street and hedge fund people. It's guys with, frankly, that look a lot more like me and you than they look like the people in Harlem or Compton. And those folks are not that I think, by the way, that's even good for any community, but like, assuming we thought that would be good for the lower income communities to be the ones getting rich off of legal weed. Let's just assume that we thought that was a good thing. I don't think that's a good thing, but let's just assume we said from that perspective that's not even happening. So it's a false promise. They're dangling dollar bills in front of these poor people, literally poor people, and saying that this is going to bring them riches, and it's not. What's happening instead is the concentration of, for example, of pot shops in those poorer communities of color. Because the upper class communities, most of them, there are exceptions. Aspen is an exception, for example, but there are exceptions, but not really. The vast majority of the upper class, they don't want these in their community. This doesn't help with real estate values. This doesn't help with better schools. This doesn't help recruit more wholesome families. This doesn't help with any of that. And so they know they don't, even though they voted for it, they don't want it in their community. So this is actually hurting the disenfranchised much more than they ever thought it would.
Yeah, this idea that something that I see on a daily basis of people in, not the nicest neighborhoods, not the best situation, being wrecked by things that they buy at a gas station, and that money goes to, a ticker on Wall Street. Like that's just such a different framing from the
Yeah.
way they're presenting it compared to what like I'm seeing on the front lines and what you see in public policy. It's just they've taken what's actually happening and inverted it for their story.
Yes, exactly. No, it's crazy. It's really the story that they have been able to make. I got to hand it to them. It's brilliant. They first remember, but by the way, let's talk about the story. The story started a lot earlier. The story started, for 50 years ago in the early 80s, late 70s, when they were very close to legalizing marijuana in the late 70s. You had the, Gen X, the baby boomer generation a lot of them hadn't yet had kids, or they were about to have kids. They were young. They wanted to legalize because this is something they did in the late 60s. And then they lost their opportunity basically when Reagan came in. For a lot of it, the country's mood just changed. We all know that. And so it became a more conservative mood. And they realized, boy, they sort of lost their chance in the 70s. And so, boy, what are we going to do to sort of make this counterculture drug more mainstream? And how do we get people who don't use marijuana to agree with us? Because the majority of people didn't use marijuana, of course. And certainly the baby boomers' parents and their parents, who were still, many of them still alive, they didn't use marijuana. So, and they were in power, right? So how do we get how do we get Reagan Republicans and George Bush folks, HW, but how do we get them to be okay with it? Because of course the Democrats were much more conservative then too. They didn't want to be the soft on drugs party. I mean, Tip O'Neill, the last thing he wanted was to be the soft on drugs party, the veritable House Speaker of the mid 80s. And so what did they do? They thought of a brilliant marketing strategy. And that brilliant marketing strategy is two words, and two words alone. It's medical marijuana. Medical marijuana. If we can tell folks that this is not only not bad for you, it's good for you, we can convince people. And if we can tell them that doctors think it's a good idea, which no doctors think it's a good idea, even today. But anyway, that's what they said. And if we can tell them that cancer patients need it. Of course, we were going through an AIDS epidemic at that time. And it's true that one of the ways you died of AIDS, you had no appetite, you had nausea, horrible, Kaposi's sarcoma, terrible things. And so anything to help somebody eat and swallow would be considered a good thing. And well, what a coincidence. THC makes you hungry. It does. It activates those receptors that relate to food and those cravings. And so that's actually, in a way, yeah, it does make you eat more. So that was actually one of the truthful things. But they were able to take advantage of what was going on and say this is about medicine. And it took about 15 years. But in the mid 90s, they finally got the hippies that realized, well, this is what's needed. And the big money guys and the people that hated the war on drugs, the backlash to the sort of Bush Clinton kind of enforcement policies, Reagan, Bush, Clinton enforcement, the backlash to that, get that group all together. And, you only need a few billionaires to help. You don't need you don't need a million small dollar donations. You need like 2 billionaires would be great. One would be wonderful. They found three: George Soros, Peter Lewis. Peter Lewis was the founder of the University of Phoenix, which is, of course, the
Ah,
most, yeah, who's the most prominent, the richest university in the world, basically for
but
profit.
really?
Yeah, the richest for-profit university in the world at
Wow.
the
Okay.
time, University of Phoenix, not Harvard, University of Phoenix, and so John Sperling, Progressive Insurance,
Oh, okay.
and so and but by the way, why would progress? I mean, what's these 2 billionaires discovered marijuana when they were 75 years old and liked it. So they all of a sudden were in favor of it. So the legalizers got lucky. George Soros, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists, but I think probably what was true is he was convinced that the war on drugs was part of a closed society. He wants an open society. And so he was convinced that this was the biggest part of it. And if you could legalize marijuana, you would get rid of the war on drugs. And so therefore that would be part of an open society. I think probably that's the motivation. I don't think he was doing it for money. He's already a multi-billionaire. But anyway, but there are other theories. You have those three people putting in money in California and Arizona to legalize marijuana as medicine. Never mind, every medical association in the country and state opposed it. Every living president, including President Jimmy Carter, I still have the letter, wrote to the people of California to tell them not to legalize medical marijuana. Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, George Bush. Those four, they signed a letter. Don't legalize. This is a Trojan horse, they said, to full legalization, because they heard from law enforcement, prevention teachers. When you actually read the initiative, you saw that it wasn't about sick people. I mean, they were included, but it was about everybody. It was for any reason. It would legalize marijuana for any reason, but it said any medical reason. Basically, that's up to you. So there was no FDA oversight. There was nothing. So it was medicine by popular vote for the first time in our country. Actually, the second time in our country. The first time in our country was something called Laetrile. I'm not going to go into Laetrile, the history of it, except the short version, the 30-second elevator version is Laetrile is an element found in an apricot pit. It was touted as a cure for cancer. It ended up being voted on by legislatures because it couldn't pass the FDA, and it killed a lot of people. So other than Laetrile, we had never had medicine by referenda, and that was a terrible experience with Laetrile. So we didn't want to do it again. And that's why Carter and all these people were saying, let's not do this. But they convinced people that it was medicine. And listen, if you're feeling bad and you're hungry or maybe even extreme nausea, for some people, a little bit of THC might be helpful. I'm actually not saying it won't be, but they used it. They took an inch, they took and went a mile with it. And so that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the end, I would say, the beginning of softening the attitudes. And they even said, the legalization people, they said that we will use marijuana as a Trojan horse to give marijuana a good name. Actually, they didn't say Trojan horse. I'm sorry. They said red herring. I got my analogies mixed up. We will use it as a red herring to give marijuana a good name. That's what the head of NORML said. NORML is the National
Ah.
Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Keith Stroop, who I know him very well, in 1979, that's what he said. And they're trying to reclassify it medically. Ironically, let me just fast forward to now and I'll stop talking so you can ask no more questions. Ironically, the godfather of medical marijuana, who started the whole thing in California, named Dennis Perone. He was even in that movie, the Sean Penn movie about Harvey Milk, if you remember that movie.
Mm,
He wasn't in it, but his character was in it because he was a big
mm.
character in the AIDS movement in the 1980s in San Francisco, right? Um, Dennis Perone later said what a mistake this was, even though he was the architect of it, because it's been usurped by big money and big government. And he was so sad at how it ushered in full legalization. His successor and the people in this movement, believe it or not, partnered with us unsuccessfully to stop legalization in California. These are the people that brought legalization, basically, because they thought that this was the way to bring it in with medical. They were so upset about how big money and big government regulation was ruining their. Basically, they wanted to give weed for free to their friends and not go to prison. That's what they wanted to do. And they said all use is medical, very hippy dippy, all use is medical. That was, I always like to say, the hippies were taken over by Wall Street. And that's what's happened now. And they started with medical marijuana. That's where the story begins. Sorry to talk so long.
No, you're good. There just seems something so fundamentally dishonest about the concept of medical marijuana. And when I was a pothead, my friends and I would get stoned and we watch these documentaries about how wonderful marijuana was. And we'd be like, oh my gosh, it can treat glaucoma. And if you're, have cancer and you're taking chemotherapy, it can treat that. Look how wonderful. But none of us had any of those conditions.
Yeah.
We were young men who were
Right.
bored and lacking purpose in life. And I think that's the
Right.
primary demographic for marijuana, not cancer patients. And I think it's just so fundamental the way they, dishonest the way they paint that.
Yeah. It was very dishonest. And I mean, there are some honest ones now that are saying, boy, this was a really bad idea and a bad mistake. And, but that's where we are with it.
Um, it seems like I think the problem with a lot of drugs that have some type of euphoric effect is
Yeah.
in the short term, it seems to cure a lot of problems. So I smoke some pot and I think, my gosh, my anxiety's better. I'm not sad anymore. Like I'm enjoying
Yeah.
life. And for 30 minutes or 2 hours or whatever, like this is like a miracle drug. And you kind of do that over and over and over. And after a year, you check back in and your baseline anxiety is 10 times higher and you're prone to depression and all these things because you are masking those symptoms rather than actually treating them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. It does. And, it's, this is the problem, is that it's sometimes in the short term it feels great. This is the issue with PTSD and veterans we have with marijuana and with psychedelics, by the way, which we haven't talked about. I'm happy to for a few minutes here at the end. But basically, for some people, it's great temporarily. I mean, it feels fine. It makes you forget your troubles. It makes you feel good. I mean, frankly, a couple shots of whiskey would do that too. But in the long term or medium to long term, and sometimes even in the short term, like 1 degree over the short term. I mean, it doesn't have to take forever these days with the high potency of marijuana. But that's when the negative effects start. And you realize that this has not been good for me. Even though in the short term, I'm forgetting my problems, I'm substituting the void with something else because my brain is being hit with basically this dopamine that's making me feel great. And we do a very good job of tricking ourselves when we're using drugs. Our brain is a very selfish organ. So our brain is saying, this feels awesome. What do you mean? This feels great. Meanwhile, your world's falling apart around you. Your future is falling apart. But your brain is great. Bob DuPont, the great Bob DuPont, one of my mentors, the founding director of NIDA, once said that the brain is the most selfish part of the body because it's just, it feels great. And this is actually where we get into the issue of coerced treatment. This false, basically this myth that you have to be ready for treatment in order for you to get it. And I'm sorry, for 80% of people, they're never going to be ready for treatment. They're going to be dead before they're ready. Why? Because their brain is saying, this is awesome. What do you mean? This is great. Why would I want to stop? And so you need something to compel you. It doesn't always have to be law enforcement, but it might be a girlfriend. I mean, in President George W. Bush's case, it was his new wife, Laura, who said it's either Jim Beam or me. And I talk about that in my new book, which is coming out in November. This idea of coerced treatment. So because your brain is wanting that hit over and over again, you often will not know when to stop until it's too late.
I wanna talk about psychedelics for a second, because I mean historically LSD has been one of those big ones that's the gateway to spiritual experiences. More recently, I've seen tons of people, myself included, where it was psilocybin or magic mushrooms. That's like this is the doorway to enlightenment. I know a lot of people who think if I could only do ayahuasca or ibogaine, then I could get sober. What can you tell me about psychedelic drugs?
Well, it's another part of snake oil. So look, there might be some use of psychedelics in very limited settings with very trained professionals when all else has failed in a very particular set of circumstances. Okay. Those are the most caveats I'll give it. But right now, the research absolutely does not support what we're hearing the hype about, how it's going to cure my opioid addiction, how it's going to cure my PTSD, how we need to have them legalized from NDMA ecstasy to ayahuasca to psilocybin mushrooms to toad venom, this DMT. And the reality is it's a huge business. It really is um, the hedge fund people, the Wall Street people, they're all into it. It's not surprising that Silicon Valley is the biggest promoter of these. And it's not a cliche either. Yeah, I guess it is a cliche. It's true. So a lot of cliches are true. This is true. That Silicon Valley folks are really into it. So the reality is, I'm very worried about it because it's another drug that's being pushed in front of the American people as a fix-it, magic bullet. And the reality is the perception disorder that some of these drugs can cause, the psychosis that some of these drugs could cause, the very bad decisions that we hear about when people are on LSD can cause. And so we need to go a lot slower. And it doesn't mean that I don't want these. I would love for these things to be miracle drugs. I want them to be miracle drugs. I mean, I want to be wrong about all of this, frankly, Ryan. But the reality is we are being proven right time and time again. And with the psychedelics, I just caution people. Be careful about what you are being presented and who is presenting it. It really matters.
What would you say to people who would say, well, I agree, some people are doing too much of this stuff, but whether it's THC or psychedelics, I'm just going to microdose?
Well, there's no scientific basis for microdosing. In fact, if anything, maybe you need to do more to get the effect. We don't know. And the reality is, a lot of times with microdosing, it's total placebo. There are studies where people are microdosing sugar, but they don't know it. And they think it's as good as with other people who are microdosing or as bad. Maybe it didn't help. So it's just, it's just this idea. The overall thing that I'm worried about is that we have left medical decisions away from institutions. And I get that institutions have also failed us in many ways. Like, this isn't a call for the status quo. Like, this is not like to just trust everybody and everything that's said. This is not a call for that. But I really think that we have gone to the other extreme. And now we're touting all kinds of things for all kinds of ailments where there's very little scientific backing. And yeah, it's for a lot of people, it's really in their heads.
So I want to talk about like the addictive nature, specifically of THC, because I think this is, when I was pulled into it, that was one of the big things. It's not addictive. Like, people don't get addicted to pot. That's not a
Right.
real thing. That's just
Yep.
a government lie. And something really interesting is I've never met a heroin addict who didn't know that heroin was bad for you. If
Yeah.
they decide to relapse, they say, "This is going to destroy my life, but I just don't care." But everybody, when it comes to THC, it's like,
Yep.
they can't stop. But like, I'm convinced that deep down this is like actually medicine, that it's actually good for me in a way that people who smoke crystal meth don't think that way. But it seems like a very specific pathology of thinking that keeps people hooked on THC. Does that, you know what I'm talking about?
Totally. Yeah, no, it is. And this is where, there's so much denial. Denial is the hallmark of addiction. Like, we know that. And the denial that is out there about THC is even more than the normal denial about addiction. So it's the denial from the individual. But in THC's case, it's often the denial of the family, denial of the community, the employer, people, because they don't think marijuana can do this. Either because they use themselves and they're under this delusion. And marijuana is one of those remarkable drugs that makes you think you know everything and you don't. Like, you think you're the best at these tests, and then you're tested on them and you fail every time. That's what the research shows. So there's a huge perception versus reality disorder with regards to marijuana. But on top of all of that, we have, our government, our institutions, our businesses saying this is okay. And so, of course, there's going to be a denial of reality because everyone else is saying it's okay. And, people still are whispering to me that, yeah, you're right. Marijuana is this was a problem. I didn't think it was, but it is. And they're whispering because they don't have the permission structure in society. So we don't have it set up yet where you can be kind of okay with saying it out loud. And by the way, it's a remarkable reversal from what used to be, and it's a testament to the legalization industry, how successful they've been. So yeah, it's a huge problem, the denial, and I think that's one of the biggest factors as to why marijuana is one of the most dangerous drugs in America, in my mind, because of the denial, because we underestimate it. And when you look at today's marijuana, you look at 99% potent versus 3% in Woodstock. When you look at the levels of psychosis and psychotic disorder, violence, look at almost every single mass casualty event in this country and try not to find a connection to marijuana. You'll have a very hard time. You'll have a very hard time. I'm not saying that that's connecting everything. I'm not saying that's the one reason. I'm not making it causal, but it's a common denominator along with other things, and folks could argue about what those things are and how important they are. I don't know how important everything is. We can't quantify it and say this is 60% responsible. We don't know, but it can't be a coincidence that this drug that's supposed to mellow you out and make you peaceful and just hungry and fall asleep on a couch is also the preferred drug of almost every mass shooter in the last 20 years in our country. It can't be a coincidence when you look at the mental health impact and the psychosis, et cetera.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to like reflect on my own experiences, and I think you kind of downplay it because there aren't like visual, or they're usually not visual or auditory hallucinations like you would see with
Yeah.
psychedelic drugs,
Yeah.
but you're constantly distorting your perception of reality over and over and over and over and over again,
Right.
day in, day out. Like, to believe that doesn't have an effect on your long-term psyche, it doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. And so, yeah, that's something that we really need to explore more as a country. It's a huge issue.
Yeah. So an analogy that I like to use a lot for marijuana, reflecting on my own experience as well, is like the idea of throwing a frog into a pot of boiling water and he instantly hops out. But if you throw him in there and kind of slowly raise the temperature, he'll boil to death without noticing. And I see people who they might, I mean,
Yeah,
there's fentanyl in everything nowadays. So if you
sure.
take a fake Xanax, or you take this or that and you overdose and you have to get Narcaned by the paramedics, that's it's like being thrown into boiling water. Hey, what I just did was really bad. I need to not do that. You
Yeah.
may go back to it, but you have a very overt message right in your face. But I feel like with marijuana, with myself, I sobered up just before my 30th birthday, and I was, when I come out of the haze, I'm shocked and horrified that I just wasted all of my 20s. And I see people wake up in 30s, 40s, 50s, the career never got off
Yeah.
the ground. The
Right.
wife and kids left and I didn't
Right.
care. And
Right.
there's a different type of horror compared to
Yeah.
that initial, acute shock of an overdose. There's a different type of horror, I think, of looking back at 20, 30 years of life that have been completely wasted that you can't get back. That's a different type of thing that it's hard to, you can't scare people into that as easily as you can talking about an overdose. Is that you resonate with
Yeah.
that?
No, definitely. I mean, increasingly you can, because marijuana's harms are just becoming impossible to ignore. So you have mainstream media, and I'll give them credit where it's due. They're actually covering this in a way they never would. I mean, we were begging the New York Times to do stories on the negative, and we got laughed at literally at editorial meetings. And now they're covering it. They have in-depth, and it's like mainly negative, which is incredible. Or Washington Post, it's incredible, because it's becoming more and more just in your face, and it's less I used to call it the slow death, like what you did with boiling water, but now it's actually a lot harsher than it ever was. But we have a long way to go. We're still not where we are in terms of people understanding the harms. We're still in a place where people think it's not bad. But I will say the polls are showing a little bit more buyer's remorse, a little bit more. You have two states, Massachusetts and Maine, that are going to vote to repeal recreational legalization sales. You have the Gallup poll showing fewer people think marijuana has a good effect on individuals or society. So you're beginning to have some of this, and so I think there will be a backlash. It may take 50 more years. I mean, tobacco, we had the first studies showing if it's connected to cancer and other issues in the 1920s and 30s, but it wasn't until the late 90s that we woke up. That took 70 years. So this might take another 50. I don't know. I hope not, because more people will get hurt. But I do think eventually the backlash is coming.
Mm. Wow. Um, this is kind of a rabbit trail, but do you have anything to say about knockoff marijuana? We used to call it spice or K2.
Yeah. The spice in K2, very harmful. Again, this is chemically, these are produced in a lab to get maximum effect. You don't know how it's going to affect you. It can be very deadly, very bad. But for some people, it doesn't have any effect. Us, because the batch that they had was basically fake. I mean, it was cut with so many things. There's no effect. You just don't know. And so I think spice in K2 is not as big of a concern as it was, but it certainly was, and it's something we should monitor.
Mm. So I got two questions left for you. One is you've kind of set up this dichotomy that sounds very David and Goliath esque, where it's like a handful of people, you on the policy side, me on
Yeah,
the addiction side. We're dealing with one, people who really really want to get high, and two, people who really really want to make money, and those
yeah,
are really powerful forces to like.
yeah.
How do you wage that war? I guess.
Well, we know who won, David and Goliath, so we know what's right at the end of the day, and that's why. Look, I treat everybody with respect. People I disagree with, um, but we need to be able to have those disagreements actually in the public square. I'm very happy to debate anybody on this. I've always said that, as long as you treat me with respect. And the reality is we have to have a long game in mind. And frankly, we are doing it for our so-called opponents, because frankly, they're the ones suffering the most. I mean, they are often the ones in a deep addiction, in deep delusion about how this chemical and by the way, it is man-made. Don't let anybody ever say that it's natural, because today's THC, there's nothing natural about it. And even if it was the natural, there are a lot of natural things you should avoid, like great white sharks and poison ivy and on and on. So that argument doesn't work. But they are under a spell. They're really under a delusion. And I pray for them, actually, that they get better. So I don't wish ill on people who oppose me and send me all the hate mail and the hate DMs and cause fear to some of my loved ones about what's going to happen to us because I'm talking about this publicly, because they are often the ones that need it most help. And so that going in it with compassion, with an open mind, understanding that we're on the right side, to me, is kind of the way I get through it.
Mm, I like that answer. Under a spell is a very good categorization, I think.
Well, it's a religion. It's a religion for
Yeah.
some people. That it's like you are attacking their religion. And I've never seen anybody protest their right to use methamphetamine.
Hmm.
I've never seen their protest their right to use heroin. Something about this drug, I don't know, almost because it is sometimes that slow burn that you're repulsed by the idea of someone trying to take that away from you. It
Mm.
feels so good and natural to you because your brain has tricked you into thinking that causes the level of vitriol and defensiveness that I don't see with other drugs.
Yeah, I mean, when I was using the pipes and the papers and all the, it felt like part of this sacred ritual that you were
Yeah.
engaging in.
Yes.
And I remember like people either criticizing my pot use or pot in
Right.
general. It felt like an attack on
Yeah.
myself. Like it felt like
Yeah.
I was personally being assaulted.
100%. And that's what's kind of scary, because people feel like they're being personally assaulted. It's not like they're saying, "Yeah, I know I shouldn't do this, but I do it anyway." Um,
Isn't there a church devoted to
oh yeah,
cannabis?
yeah, cannabis and psychedelics. There's a few cannabis,
Yeah,
psychedelics. Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, literally, it's a literal church. Yeah.
yeah. Wow. Okay, so when you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
Well, I'm going to go back to, I still don't think we're talking enough about marijuana and its relation to erratic and violent behavior, to psychosis, to learning, to the future of our country as a competitive nation in the world. I just don't think we're talking about it as enough, and we're separating like marijuana with other drugs, and saying, well, yeah, we have a drug problem, but I'm not talking about cannabis. I'm talking about marijuana. I'm talking about fentanyl and the hard ones. And we're making this hard and soft distinction when there is no such thing as that distinction. There is a distinction in terms of, yeah, how it affects a certain person and everybody's affected differently. I'm fine with that. But this idea of hard and soft, I think, is wrong. So I think we need to be talking about marijuana more in the context of all the other drugs because it can have just as bad of an effect.
I like what you're saying about how individualized that is, because
Mhm.
things like cocaine and oxycontin were easier for me to quit than marijuana because for some reason the chemical hold it had on me was just different.
Yeah, you're not the first person that's told me that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. I loved getting all this information.
And it was a lot of fun, Ryan. And really, I commend the work you do. And anything else I could do, you just let me know.
Thank you.